Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 8, Text 23, Questions by King Parikshit. Yata Atma Tantraha Bhagavan Vikridati Atma Mayaya Vishrijya Va Yata Mayam Udaste Sakshivat Vibhu. I can put it up on the TV if you just turn it on. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridatyatma Mayaya Vishrijya Va Yata Mayam Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridatyatma Mayaya Vishrijya Vayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan Vikridatyatma Mayaya Vishrijya Vayata Mayam Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu.
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Visrijya Vayatha Mayam
Vishrijya Vayata Mayam
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu.
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu.
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Visrijya Vayatamayam
Vishrijya Vayatamayam
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhuhu
Tatmatantra Bhagavan
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Kriyatyatma Mayaya
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Vishujavayatamaya
Vishrijya Vayatamayam
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu.
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhuhu.
Yes. Yes. Yasha Tantro Bhagavan
Yatatma Tatro Bhagavan
Vike Daya Atman Maya Ya
Vikridatyatma Mayaya
Vishe Vahya Thermayam
Vishrijya Vayatamayam
Udash Shubha Sivahabu.
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhuhu.
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Vikridyatma Mayaya
Vikridyatma Mayaya
Visrijya Vayatamayam
Vishrijya Vayatamayam
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhu.
Udaste Sakshivad Vibhuhu. Yatatma Tantro Bhagavan
Vigrat
Mayaya Vishrijya Vayatamayam Udaste Sakshivad Vibhuhu. Yata as Atmatantraha independent. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Vikridati enjoys his pastimes. Atmamaya by his internal potency. Vishrijya giving up. Va as also. Yata as he desires. Mayam the external potency. Udaste remains. Sakshivat just as the witness. Vibhuhu the Almighty. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The independent personality of Godhead enjoys his pastimes by his internal potency, and at the time of annihilation gives them up to the external potency, and he remains a witness to it all. Purport. Lord Sri Krishna, being the supreme personality of Godhead and fountainhead of all other incarnations, is the only independent person. He enjoys his pastimes by creation, as he desires and gives them up to the external energy at the time of annihilation. By his internal potency only, he kills the demon Putana, even though enjoying his pastimes in the lap of his mother Yashoda. And when he desires to leave this world, he creates the pastimes of killing his own family members, Yadukula, and remains unaffected by such annihilation. He is the witness of everything that is happening, and yet he has nothing to do with anything. He is independent in every respect. Maharaj Parikshit desired to know more perfectly, for a pure devotee ought to know well. Maharaj, would you like to speak on this, please?
So, internal potency of the Lord, known as Yogamaya, is one of the energies of the Lord. Parasya. The Lord has unlimited material energies, Parasya Shakti Vividhai Vishruyate, and they act differently. Although they're all acting under Him. For example, an expert electrician, he knows how to engage electricity for producing light or heat or cold. So many different energies from that one energy, from electricity, so many things. That's just a good example. The Lord has electricity under His control, but He has everything. And the internal potency, Yogamaya, is personified, and she takes care of the arrangements for managing, maintaining the spiritual world. The internal potency, and the internal potency of the Lord is where He resides, His abode. There's also another place, in external energy, and that is also working under His direction. But that is, He puts it under the control of His external energy. So we have Yogamaya and Mahamaya. Mahamaya is the external, handling the affairs of the material world. A crude example would be the law-abiding citizens are working under the civil law, civil government, whereas those who are not abiding by the law, they're put under the control of the criminal department. They have to work under a harsh system where they're put in prison. They're not given freedom, and their needs are not very nicely taken care of. It's a punishment that they're given. So both are under the same government, but each is acting in its own way to fulfill the needs of the government and to fulfill the desires of the persons working under the government. So this material world, we're living now in the material world. And this material world is sometimes manifest and sometimes not manifest. When it's created, it stays for some time. For example, the universe. People like to wonder, well, how old is the universe? How long has it been here? Well, that's calculable. You can calculate that. You know how it works when the Lord arranges it. It's done in a kind of cyclical way, cycles from time. For example, when the Lord exhales in one of His features means His incarnations. He has unlimited incarnations where He expands Himself into different forms. Advaitam Achyutam Anandam Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Namanobhijam Hidesham Durabam Adurabam Bhakta. Sometimes He expands as Mahavishnu, great form of Vishnu, so gigantic that when He exhales, from all the pores of His body emanate universes, and they expand. Those are material universes. And that one exhalation takes such a long time. He's so big that it calculates to about 311 trillion years, according to our calculation. That's how long it takes him to exhale and inhale. And during that time, the whole material manifestation is manifest. And the living entities get their different bodies, they get their different situations, and they act out so many different roles trying to be happy. And then when it's time for the Lord to inhale, everything comes back in to him, material world. And all the living entities who are still struggling to try to enjoy matter, they're brought back within the body of the Lord. And when he breathes out again, they get another chance to enjoy the material world. This is going on, and it's going on eternally, because that's the arrangement of the Lord. The Lord makes arrangements that are beyond our capacity to comprehend. We can't. We can't even imagine. How can something keep going on its own energy? We can't create things that work automatically. We try. We can make something that seems to run on its own fuel, but it never seems to quite keep going. Runs out. We have to use fuel. So a devotee of the Lord, or one who wants to be in perfect knowledge, one who's seeking knowledge, he has to learn all this. And for there's a great educational system required. Teach. Our educational system now doesn't have any of these departments. They don't even know that there is such a person behind the scenes. He's not perceivable by them because they're trying to perceive him with material senses, by their eyes. The eyes are limited. What can we see with these eyes? How far can we see? How close can we see? How bright can we see? If it's too bright, we open the eyes and they just burn out. If you look at the sun too long, burn out. So the seeing power is limited, but yet we're thinking, if there's God, I'll see him. That's ludicrous. You won't be able to see him unless you have the eyesight. It takes a lot of powerful eyesight to be able to see him. And he doesn't reveal himself to anyone just because they order him to. He's completely independent. He reveals himself to those who he wishes to reveal himself to. And the energies are going along of the Lord so nicely that the ordinary man, ordinary living entities, they can't even perceive that he's there. If you tell someone, you know there's a person behind all the workings of the universe, all the movements of the planets, stars, the constellations, you know there's a person behind it. We've never seen any person behind it. We've been looking up in the sky through our telescopes. We haven't seen any persons yet. So they judge by their own imperfect senses, and they try to then make postulations on how everything is working. So that's naturally they come up with the idea that everything is happening by accident. They say there's no no persons, there's no supernatural beings. Everything is just made of matter because that's all they can perceive. They can only perceive matter, so they think everything's made out of matter. But actually, matter is just one of the very insignificant energies of the Supreme Lord. Krishna describes matter as earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are the 8 broad categories of matter. Everything material is made of those things. So some combination of, for example, a planet has some combination of earth, and there's some water. We have so much water. And there's air. And there's space. Space is ether. And then we have the subtle elements. Those are also coming from the Lord. Where do they come from? We say they just appear. Or they were just there. That's not a very intelligent statement. If you go someplace and you see all the things that are there, mountains and seas and buildings, and you say, where do these come from? And someone says, they were just here. Always been here. No, that's because you're ignorant. You don't know where they're coming from. You don't know who made them. So first thing is, in being a student, is to realize that I don't know anything. If we think we know everything through our teeny little study and examinations, then how will we be able to understand the whole situation? Won't be possible. It's only possible by a humble approach. And in that humble approach, one has to learn from the authorities, from those who are educated by the Supreme Lord himself. He's the original knower of everything. So in order to know anything, one has to learn it from him. And then when he teaches someone, if that student becomes actually subservient and humble and begins to appreciate the Supreme Lord and act as his servant and his assistant, that person becomes endowed with the same knowledge, and he then is empowered to pass it on to others. That's what we have here. We have Parikshit asking questions, and Shukadev Goswami is answering based on the knowledge he received from Vyasadeva, his teacher, and Vyasadeva passed on the message he received from his teacher, Narada, and Narada passed on what he learned from Brahma, and Brahma, first being, he heard from Krishna himself. Hearing is the process, shruti or shravanam. If we want to know the absolute truth, the best sense to use is the sense of hearing. Not seeing. Someone says, can you show me God? Seeing God is not so easy, but hearing about God, that we can do. If we're submissive and willing to try to understand as far as possible. That's the context here of this discussion, is how to understand the Lord and understand all his energies, how everything's happening, what is my part to play in it. These are questions that a very thoughtful person will have. What lies beyond in the sky? How long have these planets been here? Where was I before I was in this lifetime, this family? What happens after death? How are things going? How's the sun keeps circling around? How does the sun stay in the sky? Why doesn't the sun burn out? So many questions, all completely beyond our capacity to understand. We have to be sheer speculators. But if we hear from the Supreme Person himself or his representatives, his students, then everything can be revealed. One can understand perfectly who he is, why he is existing, how to achieve the perfection in life, how to live in a completely blissful environment. We don't know these things, but we should know them. And human form of life is meant for this kind of information and this type of learning.
So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada said how Krishna, he is independent in every respect. And this is one of our big impediments in solving the problems of life and knowing who is God or Krishna, is that we're thinking, the conditioned souls in this world are thinking that we are independent in every respect. But the term that's used to describe the living entities in this material world is conditioned living entities. Because, like Maharaj was saying, how far can we see? How close can we see? How bright can something be that we'll be able to see it? We're conditioned by the laws of material nature. And so what are those main problems or the main conditioning in the world? It's the conditioning or the problems of birth, death, old age, and disease. So we may think we're very independent, but no matter what, everyone has to go through birth, everyone has to go through death, everyone has to try very hard to not get any disease and still get some disease, and then everyone also has to go through old age, but no one's trying for these things. We can see what the Supreme Personality of Godhead says about these processes in his form as Kapila Dev in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Let's see. Okay, description of adverse fruitive activities. So first he explains what this process of and what's the purpose of showing all this? Because we're not independent. The Supreme Lord is fully independent. And so it's very easy to see how much we're not independent in this material world when we understand that we're conditioned by these four things. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead, first he begins to describe the disease factor in the old age that accrues for every conditioned soul in the material world. He said, as a mass of clouds does not know the powerful influence of the wind, a person engaged in material consciousness does not know the powerful strength of the time factor by which he is being carried. Whatever is produced by the materialist with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the time factor destroys, and for this reason the conditioned soul laments. The misguided materialist does not know that his very body is impermanent, and that the attractions of home, land, and wealth, which are in relationship to that body, are also temporary. Out of ignorance only, he thinks that everything is permanent. The living entity, in whatever species of life he appears, finds a particular type of satisfaction in that species, and he is never averse to being situated in such a condition. The conditioned living entity is satisfied in his own particular species of life. While deluded by the covering influence of the illusory energy, he feels little inclined to cast off his body, even when in hell, for he takes delight in hellish enjoyment. So the living, in any type of species, the living entity thinks he's happy. Even the hog, he's very satisfied with his little hog family and the stools and nasty types of food that he eats. Every living entity thinks that they're happy. But here, Lord Kapila starts describing what happens to the living entity. First, he gets to the disease and the old age that accrues to one in the material world. Let's see. So they think they're happy. Here we go. Although he is always burning with anxiety, such a fool always performs all kinds of mischievous activities with a hope which is never to be fulfilled, in order to maintain his so-called family and society. He gives heart and senses to a woman who falsely charms him with Maya. He enjoys solitary embraces and talking with her, and he is enchanted by the sweet words of the small children. The attached householder remains in his family life, which is full of diplomacy and politics, always spreading miseries and controlled by acts of sense gratification. He acts just to counteract the reactions of all his miseries, and if he can successfully counteract such miseries, he thinks that he is happy. He secures money by committing violence here and there, and although he employs it in the service of his family, he himself eats only a little portion of the food thus purchased, and goes to hell for those whom he earned the money in such an irregular way. When he suffers reverses in his occupation, he tries again and again to improve himself, but when he is baffled in all attempts and is ruined, he accepts money from others because of excessive greed. Thus the unfortunate man, unsuccessful in maintaining his family members, is bereft of all beauty. He always thinks of his failure, grieving very deeply. So here's the old age and the disease coming on. After working very hard, there's no good thing that's coming from it for the ordinary materialist conditioned soul in the material world. We see after all the hard work, what's happening? The reward, here's old age, here's disease. Seeing him unable to support them, his wife and others do not treat him with the same respect as before, even as miserly farmers do not accord the same treatment to their old and worn out oxen. The foolish family man does not become averse to family life, although he is maintained by those whom he once maintained. Deformed by the influence of old age, he prepares himself to meet ultimate death. Thus he remains at home just like a pet dog and eats whatever is negligently given to him. Afflicted with many illnesses, such as dyspepsia and loss of appetite, he eats only small morsels of food, and he becomes an invalid who cannot work anymore. And Prabhupada points out in the purport that the family members, the word that was used when they're serving the person who worked really hard for them to feed them, they serve him very negligently, just some scraps or something. In that disease condition, one's eyes bulge due to the pressure of air from within, and his glands become congested with mucus. He has difficulty breathing, and upon exhaling and inhaling, he produces a sound like gura gura, a rattling within the throat. In this way, he comes under the clutches of death and lies down, surrounded by lamenting friends and relatives. And although he wants to speak with them, he no longer can, because he is under the control of time. Thus, the man who engaged with uncontrolled senses in maintaining a family dies in great grief. Seeing his relatives crying, he dies most pathetically, in great pain, and without consciousness. Okay, yeah, this is one that stood out. Because of the time factor, making one's senses and everything dulled in old age, they still have desires. They want to express something to those who are around them when they're leaving the world, and then they can't even express that, so it makes it even more painful. They want to tell them, here's everything I want you to do with the rest of life, and here's how you can fulfill my desires and plans, but then they're not able to. So that was the old age and the disease. And then death. There's no solution that's given to it by materialists and scientists and people in today's day and age. The solution that's given for death, if you even try to say, is there a solution for death, they'll think you're joking. But the solution that's given is, well, you're going to die sometime soon, so just try to enjoy it while you can. That's the solution they give. But no one even knows what happens at death. And we see, for the ordinary materialist, karmi, fruitive worker in this world, it's actually much worse than most people would think it to be. At death, he sees the messengers of the Lord of Death come before him, their eyes full of wrath, and in great fear he passes stool and urine. As a criminal is arrested for punishment by the constables of the state, a person engaged in criminal sense gratification is similarly arrested by the Yamadutas, who bind him by the neck with strong rope and cover his subtle body so that he may undergo severe punishment. Because just like there's laws of the state, there's also laws of nature and laws of God. So when people break those laws, living simply to engage in criminal sense gratification, then they have to pay the reaction. So then here's the death that conditions all the living entities here. While carried by the constables of Yamaraj, he is overwhelmed and trembles in their hands. While passing on the road, he is bitten by dogs, and he can remember the sinful activities of his life. He is thus terribly distressed. Under the scorching sun, the criminal has to pass through roads of hot sand with forest fires on both sides. He is whipped on the back by the constables because of his inability to walk, and he is afflicted by hunger and thirst. But unfortunately, there is no drinking water, no shelter, and no place for rest on the road. So Lord Kapila Dev describes that due to one's sinful activities in the material world and trying to maintain their body's standard of sense gratification and their family's standard of sense gratification, then they have to pay for all these sinful activities. And so they go painfully to the abode of Yamaraj, who he's like in charge of reformation in the material world. If one has to learn a lesson, he is the one who has to teach it to them. So he chooses how they get different kinds of bodies in different hellish planets where they suffer different kinds of punishments that actually get them to learn that, okay, I can't actually live just for sense gratification in this world. It doesn't work because I harm other living entities. And ultimately, I also am harming my own soul because I'm staying in this world longer and then having to go through these types of suffering. So after all this hellish suffering, then the living entity, having gone through all the miserable hellish conditions and having passed in a regular order through the lower forms of animal life prior to human birth, because the reason that some of these hellish planets are there is before one can think that they're enjoying, even in the life of an animal, like say a hog, it has to eat stool and all these gross things, but he enjoys it. So that he can get a taste for that, the living entity, after performing sinful activities in these lower planets, he's put in places where, that's his only kind of eatable. He goes through different types of suffering. So then once he's put in the body of an animal, he's accustomed to it. He thinks that's a nice place to be. So from being in the lower planets, now coming up back to the lower stages of animal life prior to human birth, and having thus been purged of his sins, one is again born as a human being on this earth. So much trouble. And then Lord Kapila describes the whole process of birth for the living entity. This is the one I really wanted to get through because we don't think of it. You think birth is just, oh yeah, I was comfortable in the womb and like my mom played Mozart and then I came out and it's like great. But even the process of birth is extremely distressful for the living entity. So this is another one of the problems in the material world that we're conditioned by. And the solution that the materialists give is, okay, different types of contraceptives and things like that. Then we see you get an extreme bad karmic reaction for those things because that involves killing the living entity that's supposed to be inhabiting that womb and coming out and walking around and doing his thing in the material world. So that's not a good solution to that problem of birth that we're conditioned by. Yeah, sorry. I wish I could have gotten to it, but anyway. And then what was the other one? So birth, death, old age, and disease. Yeah, so that's all of them there. Maybe we can read this one some other time. But yeah, every living entity, he's conditioned by these things. It's not like a nice experience thinking, okay, I'm independent, I can fully enjoy. But actually, no, even when one takes on a body to try to get their so-called enjoyment in this material world, the way he gets that body is extremely painful. He's packed up for a long time. There's different types of things burning him, like spicy foods, different tiny little other living entities that are also in the womb. And then when he comes out of the womb, he has desires. And again, he can't express them. So he might say, there's something biting me on my back. And then someone says, oh, you want some, he probably has a stomach ache. Let's give him medicine. And he can't refuse it. So like this, there's the independence for the conditioned soul is very small. They can choose, do we want to serve Krishna or do we want to try to keep enjoying this material energy? Enjoying in quotation marks. So if we serve Krishna, that's the solution to all these problems. I didn't get to go over the material solutions so much, but we can, think about it and see that there's not really solutions given in this world to these four problems. But if one actually serves the Supreme Personality of Godhead with love and devotion, then they go back to Krishna, they go back to the spiritual world, and these four problems are solved because all of these problems are due to having this material body in this material world. So if one serves Krishna, he explains how we get these bodies. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says what one is meditating on, what their consciousness is fixed on at the time of death, that's the state they'll attain. So if it's fixed on material things, how to improve our material condition, like we see in this cycle that Lord Kapila is explaining there, then one comes back again to this material world and just any one of the 8,400,000 different species of bodies. But if one's consciousness is fixed on Krishna through serving him with love and devotion, then Krishna says they get a form like mine. They get back their original spiritual form, and they're back in their original position in the spiritual world, serving Krishna with love and devotion, which is an eternal blissful place. They're not bothered by these temporary miserable problems anymore. So this is the real independence for the soul, is to agree to voluntarily engage as in their real position, to be themselves, an eternal servant of Krishna. And then they'll be able to serve Krishna and relish that service to him in the spiritual world eternally. So that's the real solution to these real problems in the material world that no one is giving a solution for. Okay, sorry for going a little bit over the time. So Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.